Hello, welcome to the next episode of Red Helix Cyber Focus. In this episode, we're going to be talking about cyber trends for 2026. I would like to welcome you to this episode. It's great that you're tuning in and listening to us. So in this episode, we're talking about cyber trends for 2026. This comes off the back of the work that we've put in and the wider team at Red Helix to release our Cyber Trends Report 2026. And now that the wording for this, the title especially, is quite deliberate. You know, we worked through our cyber threat report last year for 2025, but this report's slightly different. I think from the research that we did, I didn't really see the threats changing. There aren't new threats. It's just the way that the current threats are evolving. And I think part of the reason for that is that actually, if we look back over 2025, cyber criminals have been quite successful. Fundamentally, these people are human, right? And so they're going to go down the path of least resistance. And if they're being successful, why develop new threats?
Exactly. Think of cyber criminals as any other criminal, and any other criminal looking for an easy life. That's why they're doing criminal activities.
Yeah.
So if they've got something that works, they will keep doing it until it stops working, until we catch up as cyber experts. And then when we catch up, they will move again. It's a normal game of cat and mouse. Fundamentally, during this year, it's just been a lot of the same, higher volume, but a lot of the same stuff. Yeah.
It'll be interesting when we get into it because there's some key characteristics of the way these threats are going to manifest themselves into 2026 that we see coming. I think we've seen how these threats can really give you a bad day. We are going to go through some key areas of our threat report. We're not going to go through the whole thing. If you're interested in having a read, Google Red Helix Cyber Trends Report 2026, or go to the Red Helix website and go to Insights and select Cyber Insights. You'll find it all there and have a great read. Before we recorded this episode, we did some planning and we both agreed that the impact of artificial intelligence on cybersecurity is prominent, and it is the number one point in our trends report. We didn't want to cover it in massive detail, but I guess there's two areas to this. There's AI-driven threats, but then there's also AI-driven trends, and both of those areas are going to have a big impact in 26. What's your thoughts on those?
There's two ways you can look at AI. So AI as its own thing, and what that means from a cyber perspective. Yeah, using prompt poisoning, actually using the AI itself and attacking the AI. So we've got to be wary about that. But also then there's just the general use of AI to help with existing threats. So creating better phishing emails. That's the same old event, a phishing email, but probably now about the spelling mistakes and the grammar mistakes and more positive language, so it's more convincing. But both sides of that threat still exist. The use of AI just to help with existing threats, and then the abusing the AI itself, and trying to get inside people's AI engines by prompt poisoning, etc.
Tongue twister. And I think imagining these threats being powered by AI is very similar to powering anything else by AI. Just as you said, speed, accuracy. There's an element of people jumping the gun, people moving very quickly to try and gain that advantage without considering security, which creates more of an issue. And we'll come on to that point in more detail in a minute.
You saw that with cloud adoption. We saw it with virtual machines. New technology comes along, everybody thinks it's great. Everybody wants to be the first in their sector or their market to start using it. And the security thoughts come second to it. It's nothing new that we're finding people building AI systems which aren't secure, because we've seen every technology jump have the same issue.
It's that speed and accuracy and that expansion into new technology that people need to do in a considerative fashion like they've done before. From the trend report, that leads nicely onto the next point. What stood out for you, Rob? And when we were discussing it, was the rapid expansion of attack surface.
Networks are not getting smaller. We can quote Moore's law and all the other laws out there which always talked about the growth of IT, the growth of computer power, the growth of memory usage, and the growth of the internet. They're all following the same trend. Not only is the attack surface growing, as in physical size, there's also lots of different new ways we can use the internet, we can use IT. And we've talked about cloud adoption, and we've talked about remote working, we've talked about IoT, but we've talked about everything as a service over the last 2 years. Each one of those has brought new challenges to a growing expanding network of existing challenges. It's never going to stop. No one can foresee a point in time where we stop expanding our use of IT and our use of the digital world. So that attack vector is just going to keep growing. As new things come online, they're cool, they're exciting. People are going to jump on that bandwagon, and then the security concerns are always going to follow. However much we want to say security first and think about securing new applications and new services, there's always a rush to market, because the first past the post is the one who probably wins most times. We've talked about IT and IoT for years now. We are seeing that collision between IT, IoT, OT, Internet of Medical Things. They're all combining into one great big mesh, I guess, or mess, whichever way you want to look at it.
Messy mesh.
A meshy mesh, yeah, of different systems which have different control protocols. They have different security boundaries and firewalls and mechanisms built around them, but we're trying to put them all in together into one space. As a security expert, that's what's causing the problems. In reality, if we think about standard IT security, we're not that bad these days. We know to patch everything to latest patch version. We understand the OSs and the versions running. And if there's any problems, fix them straight away. In the OT and the IoT and everything else space, that structure, that system or that process isn't quite as defined as it is in the IT space. That's where I'm seeing a lot of concern at the moment. Those technologies playing catch up with what we traditionally call IT technologies.
One of the issues for security practitioners is this element of the cybersecurity threat landscape piles against the difficulties which the cyber industry has and cyber practitioners have within their businesses. It's that integrated cyber thinking into other business processes. So if you've got project managers delivering tech refresh projects or digital transition projects, they're looking at AI models, they're looking into the cloud. How well has the security practitioner got security thinking woven into that project manager's process to make sure that it's budgeted for? We would love to be able to see woven into business processes, but we know is a challenge.
On the plus side, we are getting better at that. If I go back 5, 6, 7 years, a project manager's task was to get the project delivered at all costs, on time, on cost. I'm not saying security was forgotten about, but it was certainly playing second fiddle. These days, with all the media news and press releases about security attacks, project managers and the board in general have a much firmer belief in the security process and how important it is.
Yeah, and I think 2025 and what's happened, especially with some larger organizations, brought it right into the spotlight as well. The other area which attack surface really plays against the challenges in cybersecurity is visibility. If you're going to secure it, you've got to know it's there, especially when we roll out managed cyber services, we see people, were you aware of these collection of devices that are over here doing these things? Or vice versa, they're saying, I've got this estate. I know it exists. I'm not really sure what to do with it. It's legacy. It's out of date. Sometimes they've gone for the avoid option and just said, well, I've had to put it on a closed network and the technician has to come in to access it directly because I can't secure it properly, or I don't know how.
As we start merging those boundaries again between traditional IT, and again, we've got pretty good over the years in our IT space of knowing where our assets are, should be having quite good databases and products to help us find those servers we've forgotten under the stairs. But as we then bring into the IoT and the OT environment, we could be looking at sensors on sluice gates or which were installed 15, 16, 17 years ago, making sure we've got a good asset list of all that equipment, is a massive task for these organizations.
So you mentioned asset lists there. What are we saying to these practitioners who are challenged with this at the moment?
I guess what we're saying is there's a few different ways of looking at it. We're seeing trend at the moment, like identity first rather than product first or asset first. It's called zero trust, MFA, SSO. We're trying to put another security wrapper around our environment. Just because you've got the username and the password, are you really that person? Are you allowed to do what you're trying to do on that box? We're beginning to see over the last 2 years this kind of identity first strategy rather than the traditional bunch of assets, bunch of administrators. Here's the usernames and passwords. Go and do your job. We're starting to realize over the last couple of years that has failed. The phrase people are using now is hackers hackers aren't breaking in, they're logging in. So we know that our credentials are being stolen or being harvested and sold on the dark web. We've got products to track that and monitor that. We're starting to look at different ways to secure our environments, because quite frankly, username and password has stopped working.
I mean, it's interesting that we've sort of come around towards identity security. From the points on our cyber trends for 2026 report, what stood out for me was identity security. In creating that report and coming up with things to say, identity security was fascinating. I think we've seen so many high profile breaches in 2025 on that exact attack vector. It's clearly an area where cyber criminals are being successful. We've got to address that. And the move with AI, predominantly supporting criminals, is only going to speed up the challenges with identity. Now, what we're talking about here is the how systems verify who or what are accessing resources, whether it's a person, an application, a device, or a process, and the governance behind the authentication, the access, and the trust across users, systems, and services, and how that needs to evolve to keep pace with the speed, the sophistication, and the quantity of threats that are coming through.
We're beginning to see this a number of times now. I'm using a banking application or a share trading application, and suddenly next time I log on, they start asking me to take videos of my face to do face recognition. That worked quite well for a while, until we realised that we could just hold up a picture of someone's face. And then that didn't work. So you've got to turn your face to left and right so they can really work out if it's you or whether it's just a photo. But we're beginning to see these different ways of identification, of authentication coming into what will eventually be everyday life. Most online banking, you've got your username, your password. You've probably got 2FA or MFA, on that as well. We're going to start seeing more sophisticated ways of controlling access. But
the challenge that stood out for me for cyber practitioners from a business perspective is the expansion of the quantity of identities that they're having to deal with. Not just users, it's different types of users as well, but also machine identities, processes, maybe even AI bots creeping in. There's three areas that stood out for me under identity security. So we've touched briefly on the expansion of non-human identities. There's session security, which then has a product which is living off the land, each of these areas, which I think are of significant concern, especially given how successful some of these techniques have been in 2025. We talked about non-human identities. So practitioners now need to have a conscious understanding of not only what different user groups permissions they're going to have, but also what permissions different service accounts have got to have, different cloud workloads. What are they actually able to do? And then there's got to be a requirement to then monitor these to make sure that you've not got processes and procedures or machine identities that are trying to change the way they're able to operate with the wider system. And this is where we start to see identification of malicious activity or suspicious activity, which can lead to a breach. Linked to what your point was around attack surface expansion, where we've got new technology that we maybe don't understand, we're implementing it in a really speedy fashion. This is something that's going to come very quickly, because you immediately create a bit of a weakness in your network, because you've not necessarily got the visibility of what and who is moving around and what they're able to do. You're not controlling that in a really close fashion. That's going to be really important as we move into 2026.
Makes sense. Yeah, I agree.
And you mentioned it earlier, sort of the challenge of securing sessions. It's not necessarily stealing login credentials, although we know that is a significant attack vector which people need to be cognizant of, especially the quantity of credentials that are being sold on the dark web. You see all the security vendors coming out with their statistics at this time of year. It is a significant issue. And dark web monitoring tools that are able to then monitor, but also prompt users to change passwords if they've found a legitimate password on the dark web. Cyber criminals are now stealing session tokens, so they don't need that password. They don't necessarily need to go through that MFA, because they own the session tokens and they've got it for a certain amount of time. I looked into the breach at a company called SalesLoft Drift. criminal organization actually managed to get hold of an authorization token and a refresh token so they could refresh their own authorization, and then they were able to access and exfiltrate data from an environment, leading to a breach. That happened in August. This is right up to date tactics and techniques that these businesses are using to be super sneaky. You could see that if you set the right rules around refresh tokens, practitioners could work this out.
We always talk about the game of cat and mouse between security experts and the bad guys, and them sort of leapfrogging and teaching it up. But you have the same problem in user experience, and everybody is trying to make their application or their process easier and easier for the user. And we start doing things which make sense to make the user happier. But what happens in the background is that makes it easier for the hackers and the threat actors to steal sessions and hijack sessions, etc. So we kind of play cat and mouse with ourselves, saying, "Oh, here's a great feature, isn't it great? You love using it," but it actually opens up a whole new threat vector, which the threat actors will jump on. And then we've got to find a way around it again. So we're almost a victim of our own success sometimes, making things easier for users, and then realizing that by doing that, we've also made it easier for the threat actors as well.
And I guess for the lay people, and I put myself thoroughly in that bracket, who are listening, when we talk session tokens, a session token is like a wristband. If you go to a cybersecurity event, you go to the main desk, you show your email to say that you have applied for and been granted access. You probably had to maybe show some ID to prove that you're the person who's the recipient of that email, and then you get given a wristband and you go into the event. Well, if someone else takes that wristband from you, even if you don't know about it, that other person is then able to have the same access rights that you had at the beginning without having to re-authenticate. And so if you've got a session which allows you as a user to, or a process, and this is where it gets really interesting and links right back to your attack surface when we talk about workloads and AI bots and all sorts, you can wander around a system abusing the privileges that band gives you, even if you weren't entitled to it in the first place. It's very difficult to track. What practitioners can look to do is that continuous monitoring of risk-based of sessions. Most identity threat detection and response tools are likely to address that requirement, as well as those access decisions. Do you know what different user groups are actually allowed to do and when they need to re-authenticate to change permissions and how that process works?
It's all wrapped into that sort of like zero trust concept of don't trust anybody but verify people, continuous verification, and also look at behavior. If that admin person doesn't normally connect to that finance server on a Tuesday afternoon or between the hours of 9 and 5, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and yes, he's got the right access rights, he's got the right username, he's got the right password, he may even manage to fake the MFA, but it's still 3 o'clock in the morning. So why is he on the finance server? It's just wrapping up all the technologies we've got for identity, for verification, behavior analysis, and actually putting them together to come up with this is a threat. That's what a good SOC engineer will do. That's them joining the dots to say individually, all these boxes are ticked and this is good access, but something doesn't make sense about it. Whether we employ lots of SOC analysts to do that, join the dots, or whether we can do it with technology. There's two answers to every solution. Really.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. The third sort of factor against identity was blending in with normal behavior and the challenge that causes. And artificial intelligence is going to support cyber threat actors in doing this using valid admin tools simply by allowing them to reduce the time that they spend moving around systems. We've seen the statistics that come out how the fastest breakout time, and it's tens of seconds nowadays rather than a couple of minutes a few years ago. And this is because these organizations are now able to leverage much more sophisticated technology to move laterally and to mimic legitimate processes. It makes it really challenging. There's an example of a cyber group called Shiny Hunters, and they used some voice phishing capability to get hold of some authorization tokens to trick the IT admins into thinking they were someone else. Then they were able to, extract data. And I think that was related to the Adidas breach, which was earlier on in the year. We work with the cybersecurity company Halcyon, who do anti-ransomware tooling, and they talk about tools that they have seen in the wild. And they mentioned a tool called TeamViewer, which is a perfectly legitimate tool. And actually that's being exploited quite significantly by cyber criminals to hide in plain sight, and below the radar so that they don't get detected. But that's where you come down to behavioral baselining. 9 times out of 10, a cyber criminal is still going to behave in a slightly different way to a legitimate user, even if they're hiding in a legitimate process.
Yeah.
As the anomaly detection, not just about failed logins, which is what we always think of when we think of, anomaly detection, but also, like you mentioned, Rob, suspicious locations, suspicious times, even
Exactly.
suspicious devices, and if you've got one of those, it's worth having an investigation. I guess that's where the SOC really comes into its own to back up the tools with some actual common sense to say there's a person on the end of this and they're thinking logically about
You
why
know,
Susan from accounts is logging in at 5 o'clock on a Friday from Russia.
but there are some really low tech solutions I've seen work as well to this. In a small organization I know a couple of weeks ago, they nearly sort of foul of the faking the MD's voice talking to the CFO saying, we've just won this deal. It's urgent. We've got to transfer in £500,000 from one account to another account. The only reason that didn't work for this company was because the MD and the CFO had a conversation 2 weeks before about holidays. And the CFO said, just so I know it's you, Fred, where was it you went on holiday last year? You were talking about it 2 days ago. And obviously the AI system and everything else there, what was going on in place here, didn't know that answer. So it all stopped very, very quickly, almost like a safe word. It's so low tech, but sometimes low tech works really well in a high tech industry.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Sometimes as practitioners, we can get hung up in different areas and we can be struggling to solve a problem and we can get blinkered by technology or even by a process. I can't get this process to work, or by people and culture. I just can't get people to reset their passwords when I ask them. Sometimes just looking a bit broader and thinking, okay, what's the technology that could support me in achieving this? Or what's the process, or what's the human behavioral influence that I can create? People, process, and technology. It's the buzzwords, isn't it? It's very easy for us on our podcast to say that, but we recognize it's a huge challenge. Sometimes remembering to take that step back is probably the first step. We talked about rapidly expanding attack surface. How can we address that? Well, first of all, you've got to be present and have security in the room when they're talking about implementing new projects, to make sure things like time and budget and consideration are all baked in from the beginning. Identity is the same. People will have different opinions as to what users should and shouldn't be able to do. A lot of the time, for business expediency, well, just give them access to everything. It'll be quick
Yeah,
and
we
it'll be
trust him.
easy, and we trust them. Yeah. Whereas actually, from a security perspective, you want to have those good guardrails in place. To sum it up is really challenging, but realistically for me, and I'll come to you in a minute, Rob, as to what you think sums up not just what we've talked about, but also what we expect to see going into 2026. But for me personally, it's three words, right? It's speed, quantity, and sophistication. We know that the criminals in the UK environment, they found the way in. They've found some weaknesses because in 2025
Yeah.
they've had real success exploiting specifically the two areas that we spoke about. So they're going to go after those areas with much more vim and vigor. The quantity of vectors coming towards a business is going to significantly increase, powered by AI as well, because these criminals are now able to fail fast. It's similar to the old adage of, as a defender, you've got to keep all your doors locked, whereas as an attacker, you've only got to find the one that is unlocked. And then sophistication, again, they can fail fast, they can adapt quicker. The sophistication is very quickly going to ramp up against organizations as criminals probe them to find their weaknesses and to find out where they're able to have success. That's my thoughts, Rob. What do you what's sticking in your mind?
What's sticking in my mind for next year is we're not going to be able to have a meeting or a Teams call without someone pushing AI and quantum. That's just given now. It's here to stay, and we will eventually find out where it works well for us and where it doesn't. I want to get away from having conversations about is good or bad. It's neither. It's just AI. It's like saying, is electricity good or bad? It's neither. It's electricity. It can be used for either thing. AI is just going to be exactly the same. So we almost want to take a step back and look at the threat of AI, if you want to call it that, it's just the existing threats on steroids. As you say, it's about speeds and feeds, the ability to fail quickly and then rework it and start again in the hope that the next one works. Next year, we will hopefully settle down a little bit in our rhetoric about AI. I'm hoping for next year is we actually look at AI in a slightly different approach when we're talking about security. A lot of the time, it's just what we're used to securing and what we're used to seeing, just bigger, faster. So therefore, the techniques to stop it and detect it actually don't need much improvement. It's just us as human beings, we've got to look at it in a slightly different way.
Cool. That's a brilliant point. Something we've not touched on here. It can seem like a bit of a downer with all these challenging threats, but what we haven't touched on here is the excellent level of capability that it continues to be brought into the defender's hands through service providers, technology vendors, etc. There's so many new capabilities which are coming to the market where you can really leverage the speed and the accuracy that AI can bring, especially when it's teamed with a human. But for another episode. Rob, it's been excellent chatting to you as always. For those who have enjoyed the conversation, please go to the website, have a look at the Cyber Trends 2026 report, stick it into Google, Red Helix Cyber Trends 2026. For those listening, I really hope that part of our discussion has prompted some thought. If it has, make sure you comment, make sure you share the videos and the podcast, and we'll look forward to bringing you more content from Red Helix, from Rob and myself. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Tom. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.